I think they'll get her through. If they don't, there's going to be repercussions in the Republican Party, because Betsy is seen as a real reformer, school reformer. They can't get her through. Boy, it's going to be hard to drain the swamp of our education system.
So why, though? What are the challenge? Why are they pushing back on Betsy DeVos?
Because of the fierce opposition of teachers' unions. This will be the first education secretary since Bill Bennett back in the Reagan administration. She knows these fights. She is very effective in Michigan and Detroit in getting charter schools and getting real choice. And she exposes the real hypocrisy. How many members of Congress send their kids or grandkids to Washington public schools? Barack Obama didn't do it, yet they're forcing kids to go in failing schools. It's got to stop, and she will do everything she can to stop it. She's been through these fights. That's why they fear her. She's had experience.
Is there anybody, not to jump the gun, but is there anybody who would be as much of a reformer as Betsy DeVos if she doesn't get confirmed? Steve, is it a sign, if she doesn't get confirmed, is it a sign that the stranglehold and the kind of cartel that the unions have put together in Washington will never be broken?
Yeah, there are.
And that is the word, cartel.
And it is a cartel, bad cartel. And there are good people out there who've made some reforms in states like Arizona and elsewhere. But if Betsy DeVos goes down, it says the union is predominant. And you've got elections coming up next year. Watch out, Democrats, because we will primary you if you even think of supporting a real reformer. So and Republicans fear the NEA, National Education Association, as well. So the Trump administration is going to have to use political capital to get this thing through, because she also, Betsy DeVos, is a major figure in the Republican Party. If you can't take care of your own big supporters who have done a lot of work for the party, who've been pushing reforms that you like, what does that say about other fights that are coming up?
But even more than that, she's got the goods. I mean, she's a school reformer.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
A record of reform.
Go ahead, Morgan.
Do you think this has anything to do with her somewhat shaky performance when she went for her confirmation hearing? Because we have seen people like Rex Tillerson and Mnuchin who have not had to go through the confirmation process before, who gave really excellent testimony before the Hill, were incredibly well prepared. I think even her, fiercest allies would say it was a shaky performance.
Yes, but what that does is simply give a cover for what was going to happen anyway. Right. The NEA knows this is a big, big battle, and they're going to find any excuse for their husband or her pet, anything they could latch onto to find an excuse to say, kill this nomination.
Do you see this as the existential threat to the teachers union, and do you think Mike Pence is going to have to step in and save the day here?
Because without these two, you get 50-50, and then Mike Pence would lean.
Yeah, Pence would be glad to do it. He's been fighting these battles. He was governor of Indiana. He was in Congress before that, so he absolutely knows what these stakes are. And with high technology coming along, reformers now have more weapons to break this monopoly. And so I think the unions know they got to try to stop this, and that's why even on the state level, they fight fiercely any kind of reform.
What's your take on Judge Gorsuch? Yesterday's meeting about the Supreme Court nominee, Judge Neil Gorsuch, President Trump encouraged Senate Republicans to go nuclear to get the nominee approved. Listen to this.
If we end up with the same gridlock that they've had in Washington for the last longer than 8 years, in all fairness to President Obama, a lot longer than 8 years, but if we end up with that gridlock, I would say, if you can, Mitch, go nuclear, because that would be an absolute shame if a man of this quality was caught up in the web. So I would say it's up to Mitch, but I would say go for it.
Trump also saying he would support the approval of Gorsuch with 51 votes instead of the traditional 60 that are required. That's the nuclear option. Steve, what do you think?
This is a case where that might not be necessary, because in the case of Gorsuch, one, he is so well qualified. And what I like about him, for example, is his understanding of the threat of what they call the administrative or regulatory state, where agencies make laws instead of Congress. And but the Democrats are going to have a hard time really getting real traction against him. And it doesn't change the real composition of the Supreme Court. So I think they could peel off enough Democrats, because the Democrats are going to want to preserve the filibuster if a nomination comes up that could change the complexion of the Supreme Court, the ideological complexion. They want to save it for that. To break that on a nominee who is so well qualified, who doesn't really change the composition of the court, they're probably going to save their powder for another day.
Before we move on, can we talk about tax reform for a moment? I mean, we were all in on tax reform, and we thought that this was happening sooner rather than later. Now we're talking about a tax package, reform package, second half of the year, and we're talking about a border adjustment tax. Steve Forbes, where are we on this?
This is where President Trump is going to have to step in and say, enough of this other stuff. We got to get these nominees through and all that good stuff. But here's a tax package. Move on it. And this so-called border adjustment tax, which is a national sales tax on imports, hugely destructive to this economy. Leave it out. Go for a pure tax cut package. Cut tax rates. Do some simplification. Ram it through and make it retroactive to January 1st. Politically.
That's what he promised us.
And he's got to move on it, because politically, if people don't feel right away that this new president is delivering on a better economy, better paychecks, new investments coming, they're going to have a much harder time as opposition gains ground against this administration. He's got to understand that his opponents are out, talk about nuclear, to destroy him in an impeachment. And he better get as much political capital. A good economy, as Bill Clinton discovered, does wonders when you get in trouble.
Yeah. That's the whole game plan from the Democrats, is to bog this president down at every turn and bait him, rather than focusing on making people's lives better. The Wall Street Journal put it so brilliantly in its editorial page about a week ago that every decision out of that White House has to be scrubbed with, does it help grow the economy? Does it improve people's lives? Does it grow their wages?
And that was his priority the whole campaign.
Right.
Growth, growth, growth. But my worry is it's not just the Democrats, it's Paul Ryan. Isn't the border adjustment tax in the GOP plan?
Yes, it is.
From last year. From last year.
And this is what's so strange. You know, the EPA, if it was doing its job, would find out why it is that people like Paul Ryan go to Washington and then come up with this kind of Kool-Aid tax increase. And, you know, what are they drinking down there, breathing down there? It's a destructive tax. Leave it out.
Will they, though? I mean, I know what you're recommending. Do you think that's where this is going?
This is where the president has to step in and say, cut it out. Leave it out.
I think the cooler heads, when he meets with the CEOs today, are going to say, this thing is destructive to what you're trying to do. Cut the corporate tax rate. Go with the pure basics you came up with, and that will drive the economy.
It's so bizarre. They say, well, other countries hurt their consumers with sales taxes. We should do the same thing. No. That's what makes us different.
No. I said that yesterday about Steve. I was like, here's Steve Forbes on the border adjustment tax. It's horrible. Just don't speak that way.
Great stuff. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
for your
Maria.
insight. Steve Forbes.